Hello and welcome to the 1990 series. My name's Amanda O'Shea, the Loving Life Coach from the Serendipity Experience. And I have with me today, all the way from Santa Cruz, California, Amy Chen Mills-Naim. I hope I pronounced that okay.
Yeah, perfect, actually. One
Welcome.
of the best.
Welcome, Amy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I've had a little bit of laryngitis, as I told you earlier. So I'll hopefully get through this without coughing, but I think it should be fine. And thank you for inviting me to do this.
Absolute pleasure. This is about me just sharing with the world 90 fabulous people that have been part of my world, and I really want to give thanks to you for um, for the time that I spent in a retreat with you. It wasn't for very long. I think it was 1 or 2 days. It was a few years ago, a good few years ago, in Spain, when you were over doing a little, I guess, a European tour. And you spent time, I think Sheila Massand organized this retreat. And there was something in that retreat that was, I had quite a big insight following that retreat. And I remember that there was this conversation, and I was talking about soulmates or talking about love, or that had been a subject that was so big for me, in previous years, this searching and seeking for this, I don't know, this feeling that I thought was going to come when I, found my soulmate. And there was something that you said in a conversation that we were having, which was life is your soulmate. And that really, that was something that I heard that in a way of, wow, I'd never heard it like that. Even though I'd been around the principles then for a couple of years, I still had this sort of feeling of wanting to meet the one, or wanting to have this special person in my life. And after that, I had a real freedom from that longing. Or it wasn't so much a longing, because that had fallen away a bit. It had fallen away slowly, slowly, but it was still something that I was so curious about. And so I was always really grateful, because that, I found myself kind of talking about that in a slightly different way. And I the something in that retreat, I can't remember any of the other discussions we had or what you talked about, but all I know is that that was a little turnaround point for me. When I came out of that retreat, I felt lighter.
Well, good.
Yeah, and you were just there talking about whatever you were talking about, whatever felt right at the time. And
I don't even remember.
yeah, and we don't, right? And I think that's it, sort of, and going down the line now, where I see that, I've had people sort of say to me, "Oh, I heard something you said," and it's, "Oh, I don't remember," but that's just great. It's great to know that, we're just sharing whatever feels right with us at the time, or talking from our own hearts and sharing our own messages. So thank you for that. And I also have one of your books. I don't know how many you've written, but the Spark Inside has been part of the collection that I had, and this has been shared with teachers here in Spain, and shared with people over here. And I even used to have all of these books. I'm always bringing different books into the treatment center where I work, and showing some of the children's books, yours and Jack Pransky's, of how we sort of talk about this stuff with children, which is often the most simple way. So, this spark inside, or the spark inside, has been also part of the collection. So your name has been spoken about and referred to, and for those people who don't know you that are listening to this call, you were the daughter of Roger Mills, and so you grew up didn't you? You grew up with this understanding being very close to you, and part of your world. You were born into this. So I can't imagine what that was like, to have grown up in this understanding. And I remember you telling a tale once about driving around all over the country, you know, with your dad. And so such an for me, you know, you have such an interesting story. And I'm not sure what you're actually up to these days. I know that you have a family, and I do know that you have been talking a lot about the climate crisis, and I heard that recently.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're up to these days, and you know, what's your message for the world in this moment?
Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for that invitation. It's a story I've been telling a lot, so I'm thinking, how do I make this, you know, sort of fresh? But I think the facts are the facts, right, in terms of how I got into working on climate. And I think that after we had our election in 2016, all of these issues came to the surface in the United States. And I was very active in many different arenas politically, which was new for me in terms of having come from just teaching the three principles. And I think that what I saw was there's a tendency for spiritual people, people who are working on themselves or trying to find, you know, their good feelings, their core peace, all of this kind of thing, to see politics as kind of like out there in the world and something like a garbage dump, right? Like it's there, you've got to use it, but you don't really want to visit or be a part of it, you know? And so, and then I sort of realized, and I've been actually sharing this a lot with people lately, that, you know, when spiritual and evolved people are not involved in politics, then what happens is that the people who are least evolved take over the politics. And politics, I mean, there's all the dirty dealings of politics and the mudslinging and all the awfulness and the lies of it. However, what really happens in politics is allocation of resources, right? And figuring out how resources are both collected and distributed in a society. And that is really, really, in the world of form, a very significant way of either helping people or hurting people. You know, like, so for example, a lot of us in the three principles world count on funding for our work, especially if we're working in the nonprofit realm, if we're working, let's say, in corrections, in government, or in communities, as I used to do so much, and or in schools or in juvenile hall. And you know, people who work with corporations will often be like, oh, it's so great that you work in those fields. But what they sometimes don't understand is that money is needed, you know, to be able to do three principles trainings in any of those arenas. Money is needed. We can't survive really without it, because that's our form of barter at this time in order to get our resources to live and to live our lives. So money and how it's distributed in our societies is very important. And if we don't participate in politics, then we leave it to others to decide. And that's what I saw happening in the United States. And I realized if we don't participate in democracy, we lose it, because democracy is about participation. And if we stop our participation, then we're basically saying we're handing over all the power over all of these resources, including natural resources, land, water, you know, oil, all the things that are very important to think about right now, energy resources, to whoever, you know. And so that's what I saw after the election. I saw that some of the people who least feel that they're connected with the rest of humanity, who least feel, and this is a shame for them, right? I mean, there's innocence at the heart of this, but they least feel like they're connected and interdependent with all of Earth and all of Earth's species, which we know we're so interdependent. We cannot live without the bees, you know, we cannot live without the birds, we cannot live without the fish. We all these creatures have a place in our ecosystem. So So what's happened now, as far as my analysis is concerned, is that we have allowed people to take over, and people who are not interested in democracy and participation from everyone in the society. And so that concerned me, and I got very involved in different issues. And then I decided I would just pick one. So I was doing principles work, and then I decided I would just pick one issue so I'm not too scattered. And I settled on climate, because I thought, well, without a planet, we're not going to be able to do anything else, right? So I settled on climate, and I joined Citizens Climate Lobby in the beginning of this year. And now Citizens Climate Lobby, for people who are really interested in sort of being polite and respectful, which probably most people in our worlds are interested in that kind of behavior. They're very good at that. They work in a bipartisan fashion in the United States, and actually now in other countries as well, they're trying to get a carbon tax, a significant real carbon tax going, so that we're using the sort of free market economy, or the market, we want to call it a free market. I don't know how free it really is, but to make the price of pollution too high, to bring down carbon emissions and methane emissions and so forth. So I was doing that, and at the same time, and so I was going to DC, I was talking to our congressperson, I was meeting, I was listening, I was, working with, evangelical Christians are in that group, all kinds of people are in that group, and it's a wonderful group of people. But I was starting to see, like, we all went to Washington, DC, and we all went to a hotel, and there were like thousands of us there, and we all were going to Washington to different offices with senators, and it was exciting because we were participating in democracy, and it's exciting to be in Washington, DC because of that, and the great leaders we've had in the past. And and then I kind of had this moment where I looked out at the lobby, and it was swarming with people, and I thought, every one of these people has like paid money to get here, to fly here, to drive here, to stay at this expensive hotel or at an Airbnb or wherever. It wasn't that expensive, but hotels. And we're all just spending our time and taking time off of work or taking time from our families to be here, to lobby Congress. And I started to have this thought, like, this is not right. We shouldn't have to spend our money to come here and save the planet. That's something that these Congress people and corporate people and all people with some amount of power and influence in the world should be actively very concerned about and doing, And so I stayed with the conference, but at the same time, Extinction Rebellion was doing their thing in London, right, in April, where they had an uprising, and they took over the bridges and so forth. And simultaneous to all of this, I got a paper from Jem Bendell that a lot of people have read now. It's a viral paper. It's called Positive Deep Adaptation. Actually, the paper is called Deep Adaptation, and then his particular Facebook group and online forum are called Positive Deep Adaptation. And he is was a corporate sustainability consultant, not someone terribly radical or, terribly left, working in the corporate field. And he took a pause and spent 3 months just looking at the science of climate change. Like, what is really happening right now? This was it was the summer of 2018, he released the paper. Mm-hmm. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, and you can go and argue and double check his findings, but he basically said, look, at this point, it is inevitable that we face social collapse, some amount of social collapse, because we have put too much carbon dioxide and methane and the other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and they actually have a delayed effect in terms of warming. They also stay in the atmosphere for thousands of years. So unless we can figure out a way that's not going to consume a lot of energy to take it out of the atmosphere, we really have a lot of baked in heating ahead of us. You know, it's just like they call it baked in, which means unless we come up with a miracle, which we haven't to scale, we are looking at like a 3 to 5 degree Celsius rise in temperature at this time. Like there's no way to even mitigate that. If we stop putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere now,
We can hold.
today. What's that?
I'm saying, so you're saying if we were to do something even today, that would just hold it where it is, as opposed to it even getting worse.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet the fossil fuel industry and world governments have big plans to continue to drill and to tap and to, create pipelines which leak methane, which is 100 times more of a heating agent than carbon dioxide. I mean, it is, what's happening now is like a full steam ahead, let's just use it all up. I guess I don't know what the philosophy is, because a lot of these corporations like ExxonMobil knew about global heating 30 years ago. They were very clear about what was happening. And rather than shift and try to change their industry, they decided to create a disinformation campaign to confuse everyone about the issue, which is why now on YouTube, for example, half the videos on YouTube are climate denial science, initially funded or continuing to be funded by ExxonMobil and the fossil fuel industry, which is insane. So we're looking at a world that's kind of like gone insane, and it's going to impact our children in this generation. It will probably impact us. And so what do you do with that? Once you've read, and I first of all, I said, okay, I'm going to look at the facts. And I spent about 2 to 3 months just verifying what Jem Bendell was saying. And the conclusion that I personally came to was, we don't know yet. I mean, one of the things he says in the paper is, look, we don't know. We can't predict every single thing that's going to happen, but especially how nature will respond. But we've already seen the acidification of oceans. We've seen coral reefs are dying off, and they will continue to die off. The oceans are heating. And what happened personally for me, which was part of my education on this, was I saw the sea stars, which are called starfish, in the little bay, little cove here in Santa Cruz I used to take the kids to, just dissolve, just disappear. And when I did the research on that, I found out it was due to a warming, what was called the blob, that came in as a result of this overall warming trend, and really exacerbated a disease that usually sea stars are resilient to as a species, which is called sea star wasting syndrome. And they couldn't recover, and they haven't recovered. And as a result, the sea urchins, which is their food supply, have eaten up the kelp beds. And along the California coast now, we've lost 90% of our bull kelp beds. Now, this is kelp. This is like talking about grasses, And so this is just one story of one area of the country. In Alaska, they've shut down the codfish season because there's no codfish left. It's all over the world this is happening. So it's called the 6th mass extinction of species is what we're in. And it doesn't look good. So it's like what I see in response to that, except for people who like Greta Thunberg from Sweden, who just was named the Times Person of the Year. I see not wanting to look. So we have now a situation in which the children of this world and the youth, like Sunrise Movement, Fridays for Future, Greta's movement, having to step up, just like I saw those volunteers in the hotel lobby in Washington, D.C. with Citizens Climate Lobby, having to step up to do the work that adults should have been doing 30 years ago, to to move towards saving our planet. And so to me, I don't know if maybe this is something that is a weakness in me. I don't know, but I just, when things are that unfair, I have a response.
Sure.
And my response is like, let's fix this, you know?
There's a tremendous
And so,
sadness, isn't there? There's a sadness to it when you hear that. You know, there's a sadness, and people tend to get touched, but then we're caught back up again in our normal day-to-day stuff. And it takes a certain, you know, to say, right, no, like, listen, wake up, let's, come on, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do coming together? And I think you're right.
that's right.
There is something with the children that I'm just about to bring the iHeart, the Innate Health and Resilience training into Spain. So we're training up some people here to start delivering into schools and in the Spanish area, because there's nobody doing that yet. And I went to do an assembly the other morning with years 7 and 8. So that would be like 11 and 12-year-olds, because I started to get familiar with the schools again, and I've some of the schools I'll be hoping to deliver the program into, and they've got their own radio station. And I said, I'd like to get involved with the radio station. I used to be on the radio and help maybe do some podcasts with the children. So I started to ask the children, what is it that you would like to talk about? And all of there was maybe 2 children that wanted to talk about why do we still get homework and blah, blah, blah. But most of them, it was about, you know, climate change, or the trees. It was, you know, they were talking about the animals, the trees, the environment, plastic, recycling. So, you know, I was like, wow, that's coming from our 11 and 12-year-olds. And I was really interested to know, where are you hearing this? You know, hands up in here. Who watches TV? Who, not so many. Who watches, listens to the radio? Not so many. Who watches YouTube? All the hands. Okay, well, who do you listen to? And, you know, it was quite interesting to just get curious with this age group. And the iHeart curriculum is designed for the 11 to 18-year-olds. But these guys, 11 and 12-year-olds, were really passionate, really, really passionate about the planet. So
yeah, good.
And that was quite I know, just enlightening to see, and it was quite nice to see a little bit of passion there again, and so,
And you know,
yeah, no, please, Amy, it's, you know, I'm so interested to know that you've got, it's sort of, now what then? It's like, how can we help you, or how can we help each other? What, you know, people might watch this and hear something. It's like, you know, what can they do? Educate ourselves more, read more, do one thing. You know, what is it we're doing?
So here's what I'm gonna share a couple of ideas that I've had. And what I'm doing now is, in terms of my work, I've focused almost exclusively on climate crisis. I'm still doing coaching and mentoring work, and I'm still doing, you know, if someone wanted me to come do a group training, I would do. Mm-hmm. But my primary focus is on helping people come to terms with the crisis, the nature and the extent of the crisis, because if we don't understand the nature and the extent of the crisis and the science behind it, then we won't fix it. We won't be able to respond with the appropriate measures. So that's very important, you know, that we understand that we are at tipping point at this time. And some would say we're past tipping point, and some would say, oh, we've got 10 years. The 10 years is, in my mind, is a mythology based on IPCC reports that do not include the feedback loops that are happening in the Arctic now, which is that as the ice melts, there's CO2 and methane trapped under the ice that's starting to come out. There's all kinds of these, they're called positive feedback loops, mm-hmm. but from a human perspective, they're quite negative because they accelerate the process of heating. And that's what's being triggered now in the oceans, in like in the bogs. The more, it's like the more heat we produce, the more heat kind of is created through natural systems that are unleashed. So at any rate, people need to understand that, because when people say, oh, people will send me like little, this person's picking up trash on the beach, and and so be happy. And I'm like, okay, that's great. I'm really psyched that each person can do their bit. But this is a massive global industrial economic systems issue that needs to be addressed at that level, or we will fail. So we must petition our governments and our employers, our largest bodies of impact, human organizational bodies, whether that be campuses, universities, banks, the fossil fuel industry itself, governments who can regulate these industries who have failed us at this point, failed us. So one thing that's interesting to me is that there's been this pullback from politics, even voting from a lot of spiritual communities. And what I'm looking at now is, good God, we need to get in the streets, like that's the next step here. And that's what Extinction Rebellion is doing now. Not everyone needs to do that, but, people can volunteer for CCL, they can donate to Greenpeace, but the best thing to do is to get really acquainted with, it's like when you do intake with a corporate client, let's say, and they have a problem, then you want to know, well, what's the problem? Where's it coming from? What's the root of the problem? And who needs to be spoken to? Is it in the supply chain? Is it in the, and that needs to happen first for every person, so that we can know. Then it's like feeding information into the system, so that our wisdom and can then tell us what to do, because via our personalities and our tendencies and our level of consciousness and all the factors that are personal to us, wisdom will come up with, well, this is what makes sense for you to do. Maybe it's helping to support activists via coaching. And this is a project I'm working on, is creating a list of coaches who are very familiar with the crisis, who are willing to do pro bono work with activists, and who are also willing to do paid work with organizations that can pay. So I'm calling it the list. Maybe I'll call it Amy's list to distinguish it from other lists. And then just doing consulting around people's very strong emotions. I've had very strong emotions. I don't know anyone who hasn't had strong emotions. And I've also met people in our field who are reluctant to really look because they're afraid of their strong emotions, like it's very hard. It's very difficult. And that's what Greta means when she says, I want you to feel the fear that I feel every day. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean we want to stay in fear. Mm-hmm. It just, what she really wants, I think, is for people to be willing to look at the crisis and respond accordingly. And this is where the 3 principles spiritual approach is so helpful and so useful, because we can be that lubricant, which is what we are, for people to find their right action, how they want to respond, and to try to stay in a place of grounding. And we are completely in the unknown about what's going to happen. We're seeing species die off all around us. Will that continue? We don't know. What will the chain effects be? But we know how to be in the unknown, And so that's what we can help school children with, teenagers with. I just went out on a march for the Fridays for Future School Strikes with my youngest child. We stopped at the high school. And one of the students at the high school said, I wish, she was giving a speech, she said, I wish I had a coach for this, because my only coach is fear. Which is completely understandable and completely human. So the correct response is not, for example, oh, we're going to fix this. We're going to come up with the creativity and we're going to fix this. Don't worry. That is a way that we personally are clinging to some kind of wisp of hope that actually doesn't look realistic at all at this moment, right? What's more realistic is to say we are apparently fucked and we don't know what.
I said we've blown it. That's what we would say, you know, as in Latin.
It's really difficult. You know, I was on one online forum and this woman said, yeah, I was talking about what I call a spiritual bypass from a lot of spiritual communities. And she said, I think one of the issues is that like a lot of us thought we were going to save the world, you know, and it's very hard to let that go. Now, I personally, to bring in a note of hope, I think it's important to have hope. Joanna Macy calls it active hope. Mm-hmm. And Greta calls it, when there is action, hope is everywhere. So we just can't afford to sit around living our lives as normal and saying, oh, someone else will fix this, because that's not happening. It's going to be up to the regular people, everyday people, all kinds of people, all of us now saying enough, you know, like how far has this gone? All resources need to be diverted to solving this problem. It doesn't matter how much money ExxonMobil wants to make or your company wants to make. Like that money will not be, you can't eat it, you know, basically. So we need to be looking at the value of this planet and its ecosystems and respecting that, which we haven't done since, you know, indigenous culture was sort of like the dominant culture. So we need to go back to indigenous wisdom. We need to respect the way that indigenous people who were working well with the earth, respecting the earth as a spiritual, you know, entity, actually, as a beingness, we need to work with them, and we need to stop. We can't consume at the levels that we've been consuming the resources on this planet with 8 billion people now. And that's what we're seeing. It's both a climate crisis and it's an overconsumption crisis. So anyway, the reason I go on and on about this is because while some people go into despair and don't want to, like, they get overwhelmed, most people I find in my community, even, which is a very progressive community in the United States in particular, where we have a lot of denial, most people aren't aware. They don't understand where we're at. And without that kind of understanding, and without our leaders and politicians and corporate bodies understanding and acting, then no one is understanding and acting, you know, except for the, let's say, Greenpeace and some of the NGOs and environmental groups. So now we have Extinction Rebellion, we have Fridays for Future. This is the natural response of human society, the enlightened response, as far as I'm concerned, to no one's responding, so then we respond. And what do we have power? I'm not walking the halls of Congress, you know, but I have power, you have power, we have power. And we've forgotten that we have power. And we have power always, every day, every minute of every day. It's our energy. It's our basic life energy. And we can use it in whichever way we want. And if we can wake up to the crisis, then we can all, and this is where I have the hope, which I was talking about. We have not seen what happens when people wake up, and in particular, the enlightened people wake up. We can't be in denial about this, because we are needed more than anyone else. It's like that voting thing. If we don't participate, then the activism will not go well, right? Like, so it's time. It's like the civil rights movement, in my mind, of the 1960s here in the United States. Like, you have to start to pick a side. Yeah. I'm sorry, but you do. Or the other option is, I'm going to be the one who looks at the crisis, and maybe I'm just going to do my own personal mitigation, stop flying or not fly as much, stop eating beef, all these different things that you can do. And I'm going to be the one who is going to hold the light for people, you know. that's a very needed. I'm going to be the one that people can come to when they are in distress, which they will be, which they are, and this is going to increase as long as we don't see, like, imagine being a child and understanding, like Greta, about the crisis, and being in your school system and having the adults around you not responding. Like, this is, my world is collapsing, and you're trying to pretend like everything's normal, and it's not. And I know it's not. Where are the responses of the adults, the school districts, the principals? They could be declaring emergencies. They could be changing their cafeteria menus. They could be educating the parents about driving. I mean, they could, about activism. So, yeah, there's just, and the activists that I know and the people who are very familiar with the crisis, they do need guidance, and they need guidance from people who can relate to what they're looking at, and not sort of like, oh, well, people have said to them, I've heard, through conversations, people have said to them, oh, well, it's all in your mind. It's just your issue. It's a personal, subjective issue. And to me, that's like saying, you're in London, Hitler's coming, with this vast army, and we're just going to say, oh, that's not really happening. That's just that's just a personal, subjective reality you've created. I mean, how we respond is personal and subjective. What's happening is not. And it might be that your deepest wisdom is, let me just be as still as I can be, or let me go and figure out, like, let me take time. Maybe you're an activist and you need to just step back and be like, is this the best use of my life force energy in this particular arena? Am I burning out? What's happening? I mean, there's just, it's always wisdom, right? But I'm not seeing it as a helpful thing to say that's an illusion that you're creating in your mind. For me, that doesn't feel right. And but I could listen to someone who has a perspective on that perhaps I don't have. I do sometimes think that our wisdom will help to protect, help us to find the right place to live or space for us to be with our families. I don't know. It's a strange time. I didn't expect.
I can feel your, and I think it's to, even just on this call, so anybody who watches this or sees this, it's like, what, I understand that. What are we waiting for? Like, why why have we done that as humans? Ignore or just wait for somebody else to take over? Or there's quite a lot of, there's a lot of reflection to be done, I think, even just after listening to a call like this, right? Just why does that happen? Why has that always happened with different subjects, that people ignore something that we know seems so wrong? And we talk about there's no wrongs, there's no rights. It's like, this feels wrong, right? Just like it feels globally wrong. Or it feels,
yeah.
So,
and there's some truth in the spiritual perspective of, we don't want to blame, and we don't want to be in a lot of anger, and we don't want to, there's a way to do this that can be both really firm, people call it militant, which feels too much like a battle thing. But what that means is we have to draw the line. It's just about drawing the line. It's like, if as a coach that you see someone's abusing their child, you have to call CPS. Like, you have to draw the line. Someone's being hurt, and that's what we're looking at. Is where's that sort of strong militant wisdom about enough.
Yeah, enough. That's the word, isn't it? Enough now. That is the kind of, like, you would like speak to a child, isn't it, who's just got caught up and is just in total nonsense. Like, enough now. Enough.
That sounds like a lot of our politicians. Yes. And there's the women ran. I mean, we had so many women run in 2018 in the United States, and we really put a lot of women into Congress. We still are a minority, unfortunately, but there's that going on at the same time.
Amy, thank you so much for sharing with us what how you're seeing it and where you're at with it. And I'm sure that there'd be a lot of little cages rattled, and this little call, even thank you for speaking out and for saying it how you see it. And I hope and I pray, and I'm look into my own, like you say, what can I do right here, right now? What can I do to help?
Can I just mention one last thing?
Of course you can.
Yeah. So I'm putting together a crowdfunding on GoFundMe for this work on this list that I'm doing, and a book project on spiritual activism that I'm working on, and more Medium blogs that I've been putting out, Medium essays. And some other projects I'm working with Extinction Rebellion International on regenerative culture issues, US. Regenerative culture is our spiritual sort of grounding in the midst of all of this. So you can find maybe more about that at my website soon at amychen.com, AMICHEN.com. And also I have a Facebook page called Amy Chen Coaching and Education, and I'll put this video onto that as well. So that's where you can find my work and follow and join in. And I'm looking for people who are like, hey, I'm ready and I want to help out. So
yeah, that's great. And I'll get those details. If you send them straight to me now, I'll make sure the link goes on the bottom of this recording.
Okay.
People can just
cool.
click on it. So Amy, we could talk for hours and it would be wonderful, but I realized our time's up, and
that's fine.
Thank you so much for doing what you're doing, and yeah, let's get on with it. Come on.
Yeah, let's get
on. Lots of love to you. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening. I hope that this has touched your hearts. Thank you.